Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 334 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on why is validation powerful? And it is Sunday the 6th of July 2024 as I record it. So today's podcast episode is absolutely brilliant and it's a lot of fun. Because this week I've been running a little social experiment where I try to be more validating and I try and be more mindful about making sure that I validate the other person. And it's definitely a learning curve at first, especially when you're doing it mindfully, but it's a lot of fun. It's really interesting to actually see the results. Because I've been more validating, people have been having more deep conversations with me. We've both been enjoying the conversations, and it's just been lovely as a result. So it's a really good podcast episode. So by the end of this episode, you'll learn what is validation, why is it important, and most importantly, how can we be more validating to people. So you've got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is, sorries seem to have the harder words. We all mess up at times. As such, knowing how to deliver a worthy apology is an important skill. Some particular flourishes, such as crying or kneeling, have been shown to help public apologies to go down better, whilst other research has found that apologies that are perceived to be more costly seem more sincere. That cost could take the form of compensation for damages, say, or paying for an apology to be delivered. A researcher at the Royal Holloway, University of London, wondered whether an apology that is costly because it takes more effort might also be better received. As she notes in her new paper in the British Journal of Psychology, it requires more physical effort to speak a longer word and more cognitive effort to retrieve a less commonly used word from memory. It may then follow that people instinctively make more effort to use such words whilst making apologies more sincere. Whether this is the case or not, and whether it makes any difference to the person on the receiving end, was the subject of her latest investigation. And I'll read one paragraph from the BPS Research Digest write-up. Consistent with the results of the first study, the researcher found that the statements containing longer words were deemed to be more apologetic. Again, the commonness of the words didn't have an independent effect, though. Okay, so apologies are definitely really important because, as the article says, we're all going to mess up at times. So, for example, you might forget to pick something up, or you might break a promise, you might reveal a secret by mistake, etc. Therefore, it is really important to know when to apologise and how to do it effectively, because sometimes we might apologise for the sake of it, and that's never a good thing. Because apologising for the sake of it doesn't do us any favours, and it doesn't do our social relationships any favours either. So it's important to know how to be apologetic. I would say, and this taps into today's podcast episode, is don't use uncommon words or speak longer words for the sake of it. Because here's the thing, as I talk about in today's episode about validation, If it doesn't sound natural or comfortable coming from you, then your apology and your validation is going to sound really hollow, unneeded, and it's going to sound fake. And you don't want that, especially if you genuinely mean to apologize to someone. So, just something to think about. So, the second one is, how do kids understand aha moments? Sometimes, when we're struggling to solve a problem, we get lucky enough to be struck with a sudden burst of insight, a light bulb over the head aha moment. These can happen with a wide range of challenges, be them in personal, creative, or professional endeavours, and often come with warmer feelings, a sense of motivation, and enhanced understanding of the issue. Whilst most of us have an intuitive sense what these moments feel like as an adult, the way that children understand and experience aha moments has only recently become the subject of research interest. This topic is the focus of a new study published by Josephine Haig and colleagues from the University of Oslo and Lancaster, which finds not only do children associate aha experiences with positive emotions, but that they can grow and develop. So too do their ideas about flashes of insight. Okay, so I won't lie, at first when I was reading this, I was like, what's the point of understanding this? How does this help us to understand human behaviour? And how does it help us solve real world issues? But I'm actually quite glad that we read to at the end, because it does show that by understanding how children understand aha moments, it means that we can understand how ideas about insights changes across the lifespan, and it also helps us to understand and how the children grow and develop as they age. So, from a developmental psychology perspective, this is really important because it does help us to fill in new gaps about lifespan changes. But aha moments, they're always really fun, they're always brilliant, and sometimes they they are an amazing feeling when you've been stuck on something for ages. I've had that a few times in my masters, and yeah, it can be such a relief because you've been stuck on this problem, and then suddenly you realize, oh, that's what I need to do. That's how I need to change it. Aside from that, there's not a lot more that I can say about that one. So the last one is, our search engine queries also maintain our online echo chamber. It's no exaggeration to say we live in increasingly polarized times. Research tells us that we're becoming more and more divided on everything from our beliefs on climate change and immigration to the health effects of caffeine. The blame for this is often laid with social media and its algorithms that feed us content that reinforces our views instead of challenging them. A recent paper in PNAS, though, from two universities, including the University of Chicago, identifies another powerful polarizing factor: unintentional bias in our use of search engines. And I'll read one paragraph from the write up. This particular egg experiment demonstrated that the results of our online searches do affect our opinions. More generally, the pair's research also suggests that our natural tendency towards biased searches will only reinforce what we think. What's more, another experiment by the pair found that it can influence our behaviour too. Participants who were randomly assigned to read about the health benefits rather than risks of a caffeine were subsequently more likely to choose a caffeinated rather than an uncaffeinated drink. And then the article also talks a lot about AI. So there's a few things that I would want to say here. So first of all, search engines, whether this is Google, Bing, and the sort of Facebook pixels and sort of online advertising and how our data is shared, is a massive issue. For example, I forget what I searched this a week, but I literally searched it once because I was writing it for a book, and then I got Facebook ads, I got Google ads, I got tons of ads that targeted me about this one specific thing that I literally needed for like 30 seconds. It's ridiculous. And we really do all live in a online echo chamber, which is very dangerous because if you're radicalized for example, and if you're far right, if you're a climate change denier, if you're a Star Wars anti-immigrant person, then you're only going to get more far right content. And Twitter is the worst for this. Is why I spend barely any time on Twitter these days, because all it does is spread fake news, and AI and the algorithms are not going to be helping this. So I think now that we know this, now we know search engines are the problem. Of course, it all comes down to legislation and trying to force the big tech companies to do stuff, just to try and get that act together. But I don't think that's going to happen. So I think now we need to create psychological interventions to try and counteract this. I know there's some brilliant work already being done, for example, based on inoculation theory and a whole bunch of other stuff that I learned during my applied psychology module during my undergrad. But we've got to go further because we've got to do something to decrease this polarization. So, I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So, let's move on to the personal update. So, moving on to the personal update. This week has been insanely busy, but so much fun. So, I've been working outreach for 6 days straight at the moment, and today is actually my first day off in 6 days, and then I've got 5 more days this week, and then the intense period of what's known as summer court to doing outreach work every single week for my university is over. But this week has been so much fun, so I'm going to talk about some of the highlights. So on Monday, I was supporting a whole bunch of talks about sixth form and university options at a local school that we do a lot of work with. And the reason why that was brilliant was because normally what happens is so it was like 4 back-to-back sessions. And normally what happens is as the people go on further talks, people get better, like the presenter who does it, but wonderful woman who does it, flat out love working with her, and I'm always quite excited to work with her because her boyfriend's also a clinical psychologist, so we always end up talking about him. And to be honest, she was getting worse as the talks went on. She was stumbling more. She was forgetting what she had said, and she did a brilliant job. But at the end, I turned around and said to her, "And you're so done now, aren't you?" And she was like, "No, I'm professional." So that was brilliant fun. Then I've also been supporting some other talks, and because on Wednesday, so we went to this careers day at a school, and we were doing 3 back-to-back university sessions. So what is university, and just trying to introduce students to what is university life. So that was really good though. But then, because the school didn't have enough staff to supervise us, they ended up dragging us along to this motivational speaker. At first, I was like, I so would have preferred just to sit in a room on my phone and with no students about for safeguarding reasons and just talk to my other ambassadors. But we got to see this motivational speaker who had died 12 times because his heart had stopped, and it was a really good story, and it was really quite heartbreaking what had happened to him. That's really useful, and normally I'm not sold on motivational speakers. I'm like, oh yeah, no one's really that motivational. But I think that's my own bias, that's my own issues, because I've been through so much. Sometimes compared to everything I've been through, people haven't been through that much, to be honest. And yeah, and I admit that's sometimes a bad attitude to have, and I do still support all motivational speakers because everyone truly does have something useful to share with everyone. But with this motivational speaker, because he had died a fair bit, and thankfully he was okay now, and he was thriving. I actually has a lot of energy after that speaker, which I was quite surprised about. So me and the girl who was doing the presentation, taking notes, she suggested, "Do you want to co-deliver the last one?" And I was like, "Yeah, like I'm not getting paid to present, but I want to because." Oddly enough, I do find presenting so much fun these days. Which, if you would ask me that a month ago, I would have said, no, I really don't like presenting. I do it, and once I get into the flow, I really enjoy it. But no, but now I'm actually really looking forward to doing it. I actually don't want to do anything else but presenting and doing that because I've really got my own style now. So that was a lot of fun. Then I was doing some talks on Friday, and then yesterday it was my last ever open day at my university. It wasn't that bad because lots of people had left, which meant that the recruitment people that we were given were not the best, I will admit. Thankfully, me and the two other people that we were with were really useful. I loved talking to them. And it was so lovely to see them. After everyone had gone, we got a bit bored, so we took lots of photos, lots of like silly pictures with the marketing stuff, including I'm actually on a board, like I'm actually the face of Kent psychology, which I find quite funny, even though which does make sense to be honest. And then we went out for lunch, and it was just such a lovely day. Lots of social contact, lots of early starts, and because I've been driving ambassadors about, I've been talking non-stop. So when I got home, I did just need some social rest though, and that goes back to the podcast episode from a few weeks ago about the 7 types of like rest. So that's a really useful post. But life is really good, and I'm really enjoying it at the moment. So, as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So, you can always email me, connorwiley@connorwiley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwiley.net/podcast, and you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi Wiley, or leave a comment on the Facebook post or LinkedIn post. And I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And always feel free to send pictures of where you're listening in from. I always love to see where everyone is listening from all over the world. And today's episode has been sponsored by the Psychology World magazine. And a very bad habit that I've had is not promoting the Psychology World magazine on the podcast too much, even though it is absolutely brilliant and it's such a bargain though, because what this is that this is a magazine filled up with my own books and my own psychology articles every month. So each issue contains 2 psychology books. So one of them is brand new and it's just been released that month, and then the other book has been released from the past. So you get one brand new Echo exclusive book and another psychology book. So that's all already $10, £10, €10 of ebook value. And then you will get 5 brilliant, engaging, fascinating psychology articles, and based on like former podcast episodes, which you get lots of great psychological knowledge. It's a lot of fun. I flat out love putting these issues together, and it's just so nice to have your own magazine, and it's just so much cheaper than buying the books individually. So I really do recommend it. So that's the Psychology World magazine, available for all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, local bookstore or local library if you request it. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons, and as always, a massive thank you to my patrons, because your support shows that you like the show and you are wanting to continue. So if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis and get access to tons of great rewards, including over 60, even though it's more likely to be 70 at this point, exclusive blog posts when we made into podcast episodes for weeks, months, or even years, then please head on over to patreon.com/the Psychology World podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then now you can. buymeacoffee.com/Conor Wiley. So that's enough of the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about why is validation important. So let's dive into it. This is going to be a brilliant episode. What is validation? Marshall Linehan, the creator of dialectical behavioral therapy, proposed that validation is to communicate with someone that their responses are understandable and make sense for their current situation or life context. As well as Linehan argued that experiencing little validation as a child is what makes us emotionally dysregulated adults. Of course, there will be times when we don't agree and we don't want to validate someone's experiences because we believe their actions are wrong. Yet Linehan isn't suggesting validation is the same as agreeing. Instead, validation is just legitimizing, signaling, and telling the person that it is okay to feel how they do, given everything that they've been through. This is very different to saying that they were right to act this way. Personally, I do agree with Linehan to a large extent, because my needs weren't always met as a child. I was abused, the sexuality part of me was always invalidated and hated on. This led me to develop a disorganized attachment style as a child, and this led to a lot of emotional dysregulation as an adult. My social environment, not understanding my autism, my needs, and the emotional safe space that I needed as a child really didn't help my emotional regulation. However, I think validation is more than what Linehan originally described, because invalidation can happen to you at any age, as well as whenever you've been through trauma as an adult, like I was with my rape. Invalidation is like a stab wound. Why is validation powerful? In my experience, validation is amazing because often, whenever we're experiencing a mental health difficulty, be it depression, anxiety, or a trauma based difficulty like hypervigilance or post traumatic stress disorder, you feel nervous, anxious, and scared to tell someone what has happened to you and what you're feeling. I always felt like I was stabbed, punched, or kicked whenever someone would invalidate me over my mental health and my rape. It was psychologically painful, and whenever someone does validate you, your feelings and your experiences, it makes you relax, smile, and trust the person a lot more. It was only the other day during a conversation when I wasn't proud to admit that after my rape, I became fully dependent on my best friend at the time to do a lot more for me because my mental health was so bad. I didn't know if this friend would judge me, hate me, or criticize me when I told her this story, but she validated me and said it was understandable. That made me relax, and we continued the wonderful conversation. Validation really can be a social superpower that improves friendships. Gradil, Harrison, and all 2016. So, this research team conducted a study where participants completed a nearly impossible maths test, and afterwards they needed to share their feelings with an experimenter. The experimenter was even validated and supported their participant by saying that lots of people felt the same as them, or they were invalidating. The experimenter wasn't sure why the participant was stressed. The study found that invalidated participants felt worse and had higher heartbeats than validated participants. Also, the invalidated participants felt less safe in the social interaction, as well as they showed less eye contact, smiling, and they frowned more. This shows that invalidated participants were less engaged. On the other hand, validation is healing, makes us stronger and more resilient. For example, Kim and Kim, 2013, found when participants were validated about their egg aspirants being excluded in a lab, the participants reported less aggression, negative mood, and higher self-esteem, as well as Linton and al. 2012 found that validated participants could hold a bucket of water at arm's length longer than invalidated participants. The task was physically painful, but the validated participants were told things like, "It's painful, isn't it?" Didn't find the task took as much of a toll on their mood. In addition, validation can be a form of emotional regulation, and it can be used to de-escalate conflict. Since you're acknowledging a loved one's or a friend's pain, distress, and you're telling them that you understand, this makes your friend or loved one feel supported. So over time, this can lead to increased feelings of trust, intimacy, and the feeling of a safe relationship. Thankfully, you can learn validation, and dialectical behavioral therapy gives us 6 tools that we can use to become better at validation. On the whole, validation is important because if we validate our friends, our peers, and our loved ones, then we can help everyone to feel happier, safer, and better about themselves, as well as our friends and loved ones will be more engaged with us and less aggressive during conflict. 6 ways to validate others, according to dialectical behavioral therapy. Firstly, according to DBT, paying attention is important in validation because you need to be fully present with the other person. This is because paying attention is important to making the other person feel seen and heard, as well as when you give someone your full attention by turning off your phone, not multitasking, actively listening, and communicating that you're listening by using non-verbal body language, or telling the other person that they matter to you. Secondly, you can validate someone by reading minds. In this technique, even if the other person hasn't told you, you want to guess what do you think the other person might be feeling. For example, when I was raped, I was feeling anxious all the time, I was having panic attacks, and I was in fear for my life. If I was the one telling you what had happened to me and my rape, you might guess that I was anxious, so you might affirm that by saying, "That's really scary." This type of validation might allow me to slow down, be vulnerable, and receive emotional support from you. Although I will admit that when it comes to reading minds, you do need to be careful, because if you guess incorrectly what emotion the other person is experiencing, then this might make the other person feel worse. And if you don't know the other person well, or if you're not sure what they're feeling, then it might be a good idea to form your suggestion in terms of a question, like, "Were you scared?" This gives the other person the freedom to correct you and perhaps talk about their emotions. Personally, I might call this a more advanced skill, and this is something that I try from time to time, but I'm not always sure what someone is feeling. Part of that is just autism, and this is a skill that I need to practice more. Thirdly, you can validate someone by repeating back what someone has said, because this shows them that you're listening. It's useful here to use the exact same words that the other person has been using, and you talk in a way that's comfortable for you, so it sounds natural. For instance, yesterday in the car driving back from an ambassador, then me and another psychology student were talking to another ambassador who might have been depressed. He was saying that he couldn't feel happiness, he didn't enjoy anything, and he'd been struggling with this feeling for a few months. We validated him by repeating back what he had said, making small suggestions, and drawing on our own egg experiences to show that what he's feeling is completely normal. So the next two go together because validation is all about understanding. When you validate someone, you are showing them that what they're feeling is okay and understandable based on their experiences and giving everything that you know about them. For example, after my sexual trauma, experiencing social anxiety, depression, flashbacks, post-traumatic stress disorder, and more is understandable given that I was raped. Moreover, there is always a reason why someone is feeling how they are. It might be because of a trigger, a situation, or another cause. I had so many triggers after my rape. That would make me fine one moment, and then the next second, I would be absolutely terrified and in fear for my life that I was going to be raped again. Therefore, when it comes to understanding someone and validating them, it's important to remember that there are a lot of things that can trigger someone, like bodily sensations, emotions, events, thoughts, amongst others. Chances are you will not be feeling the same as the person who you were trying to validate. For instance, if your best friend hates going home for the holidays and you love going home, you are not feeling the same emotion, but you can still validate them and tell them that their emotions are understandable. Such as, of course you hate going home at your family. They've always given you a hard time about your grades, your sexuality, and your job. Building upon this idea of understanding, it's useful to acknowledge the valid too by mentioning how anyone else in their shoes would feel the same. Like, of course you hate going home at your family. Anyone else would, because they've always given you a hard time about your grades, your sexuality, and your job. Another example, if we apply this to dating, is of course you're upset. You're going through a breakup. In this example, you're validating the other person by showing how their emotions make sense given the situation instead of their faults or other vulnerability factors. You're highlighting and validating the toughness of their situation. Finally, the sixth technique is validation by showing equality. Whenever you're validating someone, you're showing them that they're an equal to you. You are not better, superior, or stronger than them because you aren't experiencing a given emotion, or thought, or feeling. Validating someone by reacting naturally and genuinely to whatever they're sharing with you is a great. And to show them compassion and taking their emotions seriously without making them sound fragile and weak is a great. Also, what I do find interesting is a massive part of validation is never treating the other person or yourself worse because of their emotions. Validating the other person is also about validating yourself at the same time. I find this interesting because this is what I see in toxic relationships. One partner can become so fixated on validating and coming down the other partner that they don't understand, they're not aware, and they don't validate their own feelings. They think they're overreacting, not doing enough, and they treat themselves worse for validating the other partner. Do not do this. You are always valid, as is the other person that you're supporting. Validation phrases. So, in addition to the six techniques that I've mentioned above from dialectical behavioral therapy, I wanted to share with you the following validation statements that you can use in your personal and maybe professional life. I've been trying out these statements all a week, And as I mentioned earlier, using these statements really have led to some wonderful conversations. Conversations where the other person has trusted me more, become more open, and just wanted to talk to me for longer. You don't have to use these statements exclusively in a mental health context, because I've used them when helping a friend who was hinting about concerns with their job, concerns about their future, and any other time when my friends might have needed a little bit more support. So here are the statements. I think your feelings are valid. Your views are understandable. I get what you're saying. It makes sense that you feel that way. I get what you're saying and I understand why you feel this way. Here's what I would add based on how I see the situation. The last one is a good way to validate someone whilst disagreeing with them. Conclusion. So, at the end of this episode, you now know that validation is different from agreeing with the other person, since even when you disagree with what someone is saying about the same situation, you can and probably should validate them and understand why they're feeling how they do. This is difficult, especially when you don't really understand why the other person is feeling what they're feeling, and this is why practice is important. I mentioned earlier that I've had a lot of great conversations over text and in person this week, so I have been mindfully practicing validation whenever I can. I have had more relaxed, deeper, and more enjoyable conversation, and it's felt great. Ultimately, the 6 key ways to validate someone are understanding, repeating back what the other person has said, be fully present, read minds, show equality, and acknowledge the valid. As well as I would say that the final point is to make sure that you speak in a way that's natural and comfortable for you, given what you know about the other person's history, experiences, personality, and more. This all helps you to make your validation sound real and less hollow. Validation is a brilliant, compassionate, and amazing superpower. So let's get practicing and start reaping the rewards. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did, because I've been invalidated so many times because of my mental health and other stuff, and it's horrible. It really has made me distance myself from certain people, different family members, etc. etc. And it's taken a lot of work to get back to a stage where I have good relationships with certain people because they were always so invalidating. So, if you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, definitely check out the Psychology World magazine, available in all the usual places. And if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, then please head on over to patreon.com/the Psychology World podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then head on over to buymeacoffee.com/Con Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.